Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 6 based on novel. So let's start. A surge of powerful Genesis chi swept out from the figure in golden robes like a storm. The flesh, blood and bones in his body seemed to vibrate at this moment as a faint dragon roar echoed. A mighty and dignified aura spread from his body as if he was a king. The other diners in the vicinity were also caught in the aftershocks, their sorry figures backing away one after another. Although they were pretty mad inside, they could only swallow the angry yells that were about to escape their mouths when they saw who the figure was. The mighty aura converged into a maelstrom of power before sweeping towards Zhu Yuan. My word, isn't the crown prince of the Great Wu Empire being a little too tyrannical? This place isn't owned by your family, can't you let others eat in peace? Zhuqiuqingyu's peach blossom-like eyes narrowed slightly as she softly chuckled. She took a step forward as similarly powerful Genesis chi burst out from her body, completely blocking the pressure from Wu Huang. Yaoiro's face was unchanged, the only difference was the light now flashing between her brows as she extended a finger and lightly tapped in the air. It was as if an invisible spirit wave had shot out. The powerful aura from Wu Huang seemed to have been pierced by something, emitting a faint sound as it disappeared without a trace. The choking pressure followed suit, fading from the area. Pissing me off, is this little lady really such an easy target? There was an ugly expression on Luluo's little face. Why was everything going wrong today? Why did it seem that everyone was out to bully her? She really could not take it anymore. Ice blue light blossomed from the little ice blue bird on her shoulder as deadly cold chi akin to freezing air locked onto the figure in gold next to the window. The actions of these three ladies instantly made the atmosphere become hostile. Zhu Yuan's expression was akin to still water. He merely stared at the figure in gold robes, his 5 fingers tightly clenched around the dragon's resentment poison on his palm. The poison roared as if it wanted to burst out, but it was firmly suppressed by him. The view before his eyes seemed to ripple faintly, as if a long-forgotten memory had been unlocked. It was an ice-cold altar. He had been placed at its center, and in front of him lay another tiny baby boy. When he looked over, the baby boy seemed to grin at him. Zhu Yuan's eyes gently closed, darkness descending, before being opened once again, as the view before him returned to normal. Everyone on the floor watched the standoff as low whispers and cries of shock sounded. Is that the Great Wu Empire's Wu Huang? He is indeed as powerful as the rumors say. TCH, is that Zhuqiuqingyu? And the little county lord of the Thousand Beast Empire, these two ladies are not easy to deal with. There's also that otherworldly beautiful guy. I've heard that his spirit has already stepped into the corporeal stage. No wonder he was able to dispel Wu Huang's pressure with a single finger. But who is that chi-nourishing kid? I've heard of him before, he seems to be Zhu Yuan from the Great Zhu Empire. It's him. I know the story behind them. I heard that the Great Wu Empire rebelled against the Great Zhu Empire, and the phenomenon of the python and sparrow devouring the dragon back then refers to them taking the sacred dragon blessings of the Great Zhu Empire's prince, while that prince is called Zhu Yuan. So that's it, these two truly are old enemies. But the gap between Zhu Yuan and Wu Huang is too great, without those few at his side, he would have likely been swatted to death by a single palm. Numerous voices stealthily sounded as many people watched this scene in interest. While everyone thought that a battle would break out, Wu Huang suddenly withdrew his aura, his expression neither happy nor angry as he stood up. He did not speak, eyes directed to his front as he brushed past Zhu Yuan and the rest. Only when he passed by Zhu Yuan did his footsteps finally pause for a moment. He did not look towards Zhu Yuan, eyes fixed on the empty air in front of him as he spoke in a seemingly disappointed manner. I've given you so much time, but you're still only an eyesore. He shook his head, no further words as he walked down the steps. No change at all could be seen from Zhu Yuan's expression. He slowly released his grip, the dragon's resentment poison on his palm finally suppressed. Let's eat, he said. The group seated themselves at a table, Zhuqiuqingyu's peach blossom-like eyes curiously sweeping across Zhu Yuan's body as she asked, you have a quarrel with Wu Huang. Shall I play arbiter for the both of you? Zhu Yuan chuckled and answered, it's a life or death quarrel, and only one of us can live. Zhuqiuqingyu was silent for a while, before she said, then you're truly unlucky. You're completely outclassed by him. There are no absolutes in this world. Zhu Yuan slowly said, a year ago, My 8 meridian channels were nowhere to be found, making cultivation impossible, but have I not come all the way here too? Zhuqiu and Luluo were startled for a moment. This guy had only began his cultivation journey a year ago. It seems to me that there is a tiny possibility that you do have the sacred dragon blessing. Luluo propped up her cheeks and grinned. But don't worry, with us here, even Wu Huang can't do anything to you. Zhu Yuan smiled and passed the menu to Luluo. Then I'll have to give my thanks, go ahead and order. A rough glance had told him that all the food here was really high class. Let alone grade 3, even grade 4 Genesis beasts were available. The only thing was the excessively high prices numbering in several hundreds of thousands of Genesis crystals. Luluo received the menu, her large eyes glancing towards Zhuqiu as she said with a wide smile, since somebody is treating us, we'll have all the most expensive ones. Steamed thunder tiger head. Simmer-fried spirit beef. Ice flame python. The corners of Zhuqiu's mouth twitched slightly as she listened to Luluo shout out dish after this. This lass was really not the least bit polite. Night arrived. Zhu Yuan was seated on a bed in their room. With a grasp of his hand, the jade bottle containing the spirit source energy appeared within, while the underworld spirit fruit and vermilion blood grass appeared in front of him with a wave of his sleeve. His eyes seemed to sparkle a little as he gazed upon these 3 items. After seeing Wu Huang today, he had no choice but to admit that the latter was very powerful. However, this did not give rise to any fear within him. Instead, it made a raging battle intent surge out in Zhu Yuan's heart. He knew that Wu Huang was a stumbling block on his path of cultivation. Only by defeating the latter would he truly be able to walk the road of the sacred dragon. Wu Huang, we'll see just who dies at whose hands in the Saint Remains domain. When the time comes, I will let you know that my blessings are not so easily devoured. All of the misfortune you guys have caused me is merely a form of training in my eyes. Only by stepping over all of you will I finally become the true sacred dragon. That's why, don't celebrate too early. There was no longer any hesitation in Zhu Yuan's heart. Rays of light emerged from between his brows as the illusory figure of his spirit emitted a suction force, directly consuming the drop of spirit source energy. At the same time, the underworld spirit fruit and vermilion blood grass in his hands burst apart, transforming into strands of black and red chi that rose into the air and poured into Zhu Yuan's head. The drop of spirit source energy transformed into extremely pure spirit chi that endlessly poured into Zhu Yuan's spirit. Meanwhile, the black and red chi from the underworld spirit fruit and vermilion blood grass also flooded in, entwining with the pure spirit chi. A change immediately occurred when the 3 parties met. One could only watch as the pure spirit chi seemed to be refined once again, causing a faint crystal-like rainbow radiance to emerge. Strands of crystal chi sprinkled onto the spirit, while the latter greedily devoured the former. The illusory figure gradually began to become more and more corporeal. As Zhu Yuan felt the climbing power of his spirit, he began to activate the primal chaos divine grindstone visualization method. In the void, a limitless mottled grindstone slowly turned. It was as if all things that were cast upon its wheel would be crushed into nothingness. However, the current Zhu Yuan's fear of the grindstone had already retreated. His spirit drifted forward, no hesitation whatsoever, as it cast itself onto the wheel. Rumble. The divine grindstone began to revolve, pulverizing the tiny spirit. Dreadful power enveloped Zhu Yuan's spirit, causing it tremble uncontrollably. However, he gritted his teeth and desperately endured while the spirit chi from the spirit source energy continuously supported him. Thus, Zhu Yuan's spirit persisted as the divine grindstone turned. The dark gold marking on the mottled grindstone slowly shifted. Almost an eternity seemed to have passed, while cracks had begun to appear on Zhu Yuan's spirit, a sign that he was about to reach his limit. Even so, even under the intense pain that was practically about to burst apart his spirit from the inside, Zhu Yuan did not entertain any thoughts of giving up. Meeting Wu Huang today had made Zhu Yuan feel some pressure. Regardless of what had happened, Wu Huang stood at the peak of the Kangmang continent's younger generation, and his strength was far greater than Zhu Yuan's own. For Zhu Yuan to shrink this gap, the upgrade of his spirit had to succeed. If I can't even overcome this little hardship, what right do I have to step onto the sacred dragon road again? A roar seemed to thunder in Zhu Yuan's heart. As if sensing Zhu Yuan's will, a powerful ripple suddenly exploded from his spirit as the cracks that had appeared on it were swiftly repaired. Click. A faint click was heard. It was the sound of the dark gold vertical markings on the top and bottom halves of the mottled divine grindstone joining once again. Zhu Yuan had finally endured the second revolution of the primal chaos divine grindstone visualization method. Every revolution a whole new realm. A voice was transmitted into Zhu Yuan's ears as he finally relaxed. His spirit was pulverized as the grindstone began to revolve once again, reforming itself several breaths later outside the grindstone. The reformed spirit was several times more condensed than before, so much so that there were faint signs of it turning truly corporeal. Advanced illusory stage. Uncontrollable joy surged out in Zhu Yuan's heart. After suffering numerous hardships, his spirit had finally stepped into the advanced illusory stage. Now that it was at the advanced illusory stage, he could finally learn grade 3 Genesis runes. Although his current Genesis Chi cultivation was still stuck at the advanced Chi nourishing stage, his true power was much greater due to the domineering Omnipython Chi and his blood-red Chi dwelling. As such, even if he were to only use Genesis Chi in battle, Zhu Yuan's battle power would not lose out to a mid-Heaven Gate stage expert. When grade 3 Genesis runes were thrown into the mix, advanced Heaven Gate stage opponents would no longer be able to threaten him so easily. However, Zhu Yuan felt a little regretful that these advanced Heaven Gate stage experts did not include the apex prided geniuses like Wu Huang. These individuals already stood at the pinnacle of the advanced Heaven Gate stage, and also possessed the ability to do battle with those at a higher cultivation level. Hence, for Zhu Yuan to face Wu Huang in a direct clash, the former needed to at the very least raise his Genesis Chi cultivation to the Heaven Gate stage. Though this was so, Zhu Yuan was not discouraged, because the gap between them was rapidly shrinking. In the room, Zhu Yuan's tightly shut eyes slowly opened, while the flickering light between his brows gradually receded. He raised his head and looked outside the window, where the night sky was slowly withdrawing as the first rays of dawn broke through the heavy layers of clouds, shining onto the magnificent Saint-Romain's city. While his eyes peered outside, his 5 fingers slowly tightened into a fist. Wu Huang, let's fully settle the grudge between us in the Saint-Romain's domain. After ascending to the advanced illusory stage, the first thing Zhu Yuan did was find Yao Yao. You've broken through. The latter immediately asked upon seeing him. When she saw Zhu Yuan nod, she too nodded as a slight smile emerged on her lips. Only when one knows shame can one truly display one's power and courage. Not bad. She was clearly referring to yesterday's event, when they met Wu Huang. Zhu Yuan had turned that pressure into motivation for his breakthrough. Zhu Yuan grinned and said, "Can you teach me grade 3 Genesis runes today?" The Saint-Romain's domain was about to open, so he needed to make use of what little time he had to learn a few grade 3 Genesis runes. Only then would he have some insurance when he entered the Saint-Romain's domain. Good idea. I can avoid those two dragging me out to window shop. Yao Yao lazily stretched her back. She was really somewhat helpless with regards to the situation. Luluor had already been too energetic, and now, there was another Zhuqiu who looked at Yao Yao in a strange manner. To the peace-loving Yao Yao, their attention was practically akin to torture. Thus, the two found a quiet room and began to practice grade 3 Genesis runes. The lesson went on all the way from the early morning till the sun was setting in the sky. Yao Yao rubbed Tunton as she said to Zhu Yuan, "You should now have some elementary understanding of these few grade 3 Genesis runes. However, you still require a tremendous amount of practice in order to successfully utilize them." Zhu Yuan nodded. "I will master them as soon as possible." Yao Yao's bright eyes looked towards Zhu Yuan. "Looks like Wu Huang has given you a substantial amount of pressure." Zhu Yuan smiled and nodded, not denying it. "He indeed stronger than me. I need to raise my strength." Yao Yao touched her cheek with one hand as the slender fingers of her other hand tapped the table. Wu Huang is indeed a remarkable person. After yesterday's encounter, even Yao Yao with her high standards had judged that Wu Huang was considerably outstanding amongst the younger generation. Although he was arrogant, he had the ability to back up his pride. However, Yao Yao suddenly paused, staring at Zhu Yuan as she said, "His life has been smooth sailing since young, his triumphs and rapid progress naturally making him arrogant. But from what I can see, compared to him, the you that broke free from your hopeless situation, and never felt inferior, as you earnestly worked hard to move forward, is even more outstanding than him." Zhu Yuan was taken aback, a smile involuntarily forming on his face. "Are you praising me?" This was far too rare. Given Yao Yao's standards, Zhu Yuan had never seen her praise in such a tone. Yaoyao's red lips lifted slightly. It can be considered praise. Zhu Yuan nodded. Thank you. Burning battle intent rose in his eyes. Like Yao Yao had said, Wu Huang's strength originated from the smooth road King Wu had paved for him, an easy road of triumphant progress. On the other hand, he had to face despair since young. His 8 meridian channels had been nowhere to be found, making it impossible for him to cultivate. He had ultimately created his own path through these tribulations one step at a time. He had never felt that he was any less a person than Wu Huang. Zhu Yuan took in a deep breath, calming the emotions in his heart. In the next instant, however, their expressions suddenly changed slightly as they stood up and cast their gazes at the sky outside Saint Romain's city. At this current time, 6 shooting star-like objects were streaking past the horizon as vast and indescribably mighty auras filled the land, enveloping the entire city. The Genesis rune boundary above Saint Romain's city began to open at this moment. A powerful voice rang out across the entire city. Saint Romain's city, Xiao Qianluo, respectfully welcomes the envoys of the 6 sacred sects. The arrival of the envoys from the 6 sacred sects had undoubtedly become the most discussed topic in the city. The blood of every prided genius was boiling, the eyes on their raised heads filled with anticipation. Everyone had heard of the famed 6 sacred sects. Entering any of them to train was akin to ascending the heavens in the single step. The 6 sacred sects were just too powerful, the overlords of this world. Even an enormous continent like this was merely akin to a remote corner in their eyes. However, the envoys did not show themselves after arriving at Saint Romain's city. It was said that even the city lord Xiao Qianluo was unable to meet them in the city lord residence. After all, the disparity in status between them was just far too great. Even if one party was only an envoy, it was still far from what a mere lord of a city could compare to. Although the envoys from the 6 sacred sects did not reveal themselves, it did not hinder the gradual rise in excitement within the city. At the very least, everyone knew that the arrival of the envoys meant that the opening of the Saint Romain's domain was fast approaching. Unlike everyone else, Zhu Yuan paid no attention to the arrival of the envoys. All his attention had been invested into learning grade 3 Genesis runes. Under his nearly fanatical studying, the grade 3 Genesis runes Yao Yao taught him were gradually being mastered at the elementary level. At this current point in time, it had already been 5 days since the envoys from the 6 sacred sects had arrived at Saint Romain's city. House of Geniuses. Inside a certain restaurant, Zhu Yuan sat alone next to a window. Yao Yao had been dragged out by Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu again. He had spent yet another day immersed in the study of grade 3 Genesis runes, and was currently taking a little time off. After drinking 2 cups of the restaurant's wine, Zhu Yuan shook his head in dissatisfaction. Having spent so much time with Yao Yao, he had now grown to become exceptionally picky about his alcohol. He seemed to fall into thought for a moment, before retrieving a jade bottle from his universe bag. It was part of the good stuff he had collected for Yao Yao, and it just so happened that this was a good time for him to have a secret sample. As such, Zhu Yuan enjoyed his drinking alone, his tense mental state slowly relaxing in the process. The truth was, his zealous practicing for the past few days had indeed been due to the pressure from Wu Huang. It would indeed be a joke if the lead that the latter had accumulated over the years was so easily surpassed. Even though my spirit has already stepped into the advanced illusory stage, I still have stand no chance against Wu Huang. Zhu Yuan's gaze faintly flickered in thought. Of course, it was true that he might be able to put up a fight if he were to borrow Silver Shadow's strength. However, that was only to be used in the worst-case scenario, because once he used Silver Shadow, Zhu Yuan did not know how long he would be unconscious. Being unconscious for too long in a place like the Saint Romain's domain was practically suicide. It seems that I need to find a chance to ascend to the Heaven Gate stage in the Saint Romain's domain. Zhu Yuan's heart churned. While Zhu Yuan was lost in thought, he suddenly sensed some activity beside him. He lifted his head to look, only to find that a middle-aged man was now seated in front of him. This man's appearance was pretty unkempt and was even barefoot, while green smoke wafted from the pipe in his hand. He looked exactly like an old farmer that had just left his fields. At this current moment, the man was anxiously staring at the jade bottle full of excellent wine that stood before Zhu Yuan, as he forced a smile and said, "Youngin, your wine is not bad." Zhu Yuan was stunned, somewhat unable to figure out where this barefoot middle-aged man had come from. He was unable to sense much Genesis chi undulations from the latter's body. Even so, Zhu Yuan was no petty person. The sight of the man's anxious appearance made him smile as he pushed the bottle over. The old farmer-like man hurriedly received it upon seeing this, and poured a cup for himself. A mouthful later, an enchanted look filled his face. Not bad, not bad. If uncle likes it, I'll give it to you. Zhu Yuan chuckled. The middle-aged man's eyes immediately brightened as he excitedly responded, then I'll give you my thanks, youngin. He took another mouthful before picking up his pipe again, and drawing in a deep breath. Green smoke rolled out, its acrid flavor causing the surrounding geniuses to frown. The unkempt middle-aged man enjoyed a puff of smoke as he remarked, youngin, there's something amiss about the way the others look at you. Zhu Yuan shot a glance at his surroundings. The various geniuses were looking at him as if they were looking at a dead person. He knew that it was because news of the grudge between him and Wu Huang had already begun to spread. From their point of view, he was only a qi-nourishing stage practitioner, and yet he had an enemy like Wu Huang. This was undoubtedly akin to having half a foot in the grave. Zhu Yuan smiled and said, I have a life-or-death enemy called Wu Huang, and they likely believe that I'm screwed. Wu Huang. The middle-aged uncle seemed to have heard of this name. His gaze immediately filled with pity as he looked at Zhu Yuan and said, then you are indeed rather pitiful. Zhu Yuan laughed, unoffended. He was already used to such a response. However, the middle-aged uncle quickly crowded over and said in a low voice, moreover, I've heard that the envoy from Sacred Palace has already met Wu Huang and is very satisfied with him. As long as Wu Huang is able to distinguish himself in the Saint Remains domain, he will be accepted into Sacred Palace and become their disciple. Sacred Palace. Zhu Yuan's heart shook a little. By this current point in time, he had already gained some knowledge with regards to the 6 sacred sects. It was said that Sacred Palace was the strongest amongst the 6 sects. He never imagined that the envoy from Sacred Palace had already met with Wu Huang. Zhu Yuan's eyes flickered, before eventually returning to calmness. He stared at the sloppy-looking uncle and asked, does uncle work at the City Lord residence? Outsiders would not be privy to such information. Only those in the City Lord residence might catch some scraps. The slovenly uncle chuckled and continued to drink his wine. He sucked on his pipe and breathed out swirling green smoke as he shot a sideways glance at Zhu Yuan. Youngin, if you wish to take your revenge, the Saint Remains domain will be your final chance. Zhu Yuan nodded, not saying anything else. I'll be taking this wine, don't drink too much. The uncle grinned as he kept the bottle into his sleeves. He breathed out a puff of smoke as he looked towards Zhu Yuan. Youngin, the Saint Remains domain will open tomorrow. There's someone who has great expectations of you, so you better put in some effort. If your performance ends up terrible, it will really be a little embarrassing. Zhu Yuan was taken aback, somewhat confused. There seemed to be a deeper meaning within the uncle's words. Plus, how did he know when the Saint Remains domain was opening? Zhu Yuan frowned and asked, who are you? The slovenly uncle did not reply, merely waving his hand as he puffed out another ring of green smoke. His bare feet walking on the ground as he unhurriedly made his exit. Zhu Yuan's eyes were filled with confusion. This barefoot uncle was not as simple as he had thought. However, he did not dwell too much on this event, spending a little more time sitting alone, before rising and returning to the room. Not long after he returned, news that shook the entire Saint Remains city began to spread. The Saint Remains domain was opening tomorrow. In the room, Zhu Yuan was dazed by this news. The unkempt uncle had been right, just who exactly was he? By the time the next day arrived, the entire Saint Remains city was already boiling with excitement. Especially when 6 streaks of light flew out from the City Lord residence and headed directly for the Saint Remains domain. The countless geniuses inside the city also rose into the air, treading on Genesis Chi as they shot forth, covering the sky and earth like locusts. Zhu Yuan gazed upon this magnificent scene, before turning his head towards Yao Yao, Luluo and Zhuqiuqingyu. We should go too. Zhuqiuqingyu had practically attached herself to Yao Yao for the past few days. Yao Yao could not be bothered to explain, while Luluo was purely waiting for the fun to start when the truth was revealed. This was why Zhuqiuqingyu had yet to realize that the beautiful man in her eyes was actually a fake. Yao Yao and the rest naturally had no objections. Hence, the group also moved, heading towards the Saint Remains domain. The Saint Remains domain was about 30 miles from Saint Remains city. At full speed, it did not take much time for the group to reach their destination. Zhu Yuan peered into the distance, where a giant, practically endless basin had appeared at the end of his sight. Mist shrouded the sky above the basin, giving off faint, but strange undulations that made one's heart shiver. Under the mist was an incomparably large river. Light glimmered on the surface of the river's calm and rippleless waters that gave one a feeling of depthlessness. This should be the holy river that encircled the outer region of the Saint Romain's domain. Countless figures descended, extending all the way to the end of one's sight. No one knew just how many people had come. Outside the Saint Romain's domain were 6 titanic stone platforms, on which figures were landing one after another. Zhu Yuan's group also landed on one of the platforms. Above the platforms, 6 powerful Genesis Chi torrents whizzed about like storms. Within the storms, one could just barely discern 6 seated figures. Zhu Yuan inquired in a low voice, "Are those the envoys from the 6 sacred sects?" Luluo nodded and replied, "Yes. It is said that all 6 are experts that have reached the divine dwelling stage." 6 divine dwelling stage practitioners. Zhu Yuan could not help but sigh in admiration. These experts were top class even in the Kangman continent. Zuo Qingyu was making up binoculars with her hands as she said with a grin, "I heard that the one above this stone platform of ours comes from Sacred Palace." Sacred Palace. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. The barefoot uncle from yesterday had mentioned that the Sacred Palace envoy had already taken a liking to Wu Huang. As long as the latter's performed well in the Saint Romain's domain, he would be accepted into Sacred Palace, ascending the heavens in a single step. While these thoughts swirled in Zhu Yuan's mind, he suddenly lifted his head and looked towards a certain spot in the distance where a golden figure was standing with his hands behind his back. A strong and powerful aura pulsed from his body, making it such that none of the surrounding geniuses dared to approach. That pressure naturally originated from Wu Huang. Wu Huang also tilted his head at this moment, his emotionless gaze sweeping across Zhu Yuan before pausing. His spirit has reached the advanced illusory stage. Wu Huang's eyes rippled faintly. The crippled dragon of the Zhu clan did have some ability. Truly a troublesome fly, mumbled Wu Huang as a strange light suddenly appeared in his eyes. It was at this very moment that Zhu Yuan suddenly felt all the hairs on his body stand as an indescribable feeling of danger surged in his heart. His eyes firmly locked onto Wu Huang. The latter suddenly raised his hand at this moment, his 5 fingers tightly clenching into a fist, before throwing a punch at Zhu Yuan. Rumble. Scarlet-red Genesis Chi whizzed forth like a scorching sun, swift as thunder as it shot towards Zhu Yuan. "Wu Huang, you're too much." Luluo and Zuo Qingyu detected the attack, and immediately shouted out in anger, vigorous Genesis Chi exploding from their bodies. Iciness also flashed across Yaoyou's eyes, as the spirit on her bright forehead began to shake. Tunten also released a low roar from her arms. However, just as they were about to stop the attack, an overwhelming pressure suddenly descended from the sky, forcing all of their Genesis Chi back into their bodies. The Sacred Palace envoy. Luluo's and Zuo Qingyu's pretty faces changed. The pressure had come from the Sacred Palace envoy seated in the sky above. Meanwhile, the scarlet-red fist of light had already arrived before Zhu Yuan. Even an advanced Heaven Gate practitioner would fear the immense power contained within it. "That guy is dead." One of the geniuses in the vicinity sighed. No one had expected that Wu Huang would suddenly attack, not to mention his mercilessness. He clearly intended to kill Zhu Yuan with a single punch. Scarlet light filled Zhu Yuan's eyeballs, the ferocious undulations that swept towards him naturally making his pupils tighten. However, he did not panic at this critical juncture, but instead suddenly took half a step forward. He crossed his arms in front of him as a rune of light appeared on them. Grade 3 Genesis rune, Mighty Tortoise Armor rune. In the wake of the yell in Zhu Yuan's heart, light began to weave together in front of him, forming a dim grey tortoise shell that was a few feet wide. The mottled shell gave off a feeling of sturdiness, as if it was capable of withstanding a heavy blow that could shatter a mountain. Boom! The scarlet-red light fist smashed into the tortoise shell, scarlet-red light raging as cracks began to appear on the shell. In the end, the shell only managed to bitterly endure for several breaths before shattering with a boom. The remains of the scarlet-red light fist slammed into Zhu Yuan's arms. Thump! His body shot backwards, his legs smearing long scars on the ground as dust filled the air. Countless gazes looked over as several people frowned. Wu Huang's actions were really somewhat ugly. His strength was clearly far beyond Zhu Yuan's, and yet the former still had to resort to such tactics. Zhu Yuan is probably dead, right? Numerous voices rang out as they looked towards the dust cloud. Somewhere else far away, Xiao Qianxian, Ji Yuling and the rest involuntarily burst out into laughter when they saw this scene. The sight of Zhu Yuan had finally become too irksome to Wu Huang. Wu Huang's expression remained indifferent, as if his previous action had merely been akin to swatting an annoying fly. Everyone stared as the dust settled. Next, their expressions suddenly changed. They had discovered that a figure was still standing within the falling dust. The stone floor beneath his feet had fractured, and green scales could faintly be seen on his crossed arms. However, the scales were currently in bits and pieces. Fresh blood flowed down along his arms, dripping onto the ground below. Zhu Yuan's expression was serene, but the killing intent that swelled within his eyes were practically akin to a bursting dam. If not for his elementary mastery of a defensive grade 3 Genesis rune and the defensive powers of the magical python scales, Wu Huang's punch would have killed him. Zhu Yuan, are you all right? Yao Yao, Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu rushed to Zhu Yuan's side. Tunton jumped out from Yao Yao's arms and roared, its tiny body rapidly growing as it transformed into a mysterious giant beast. Black light pulsed from its enormous mouth as it glared at Wu Huang. It was extremely intelligent, and although it normally treated Zhu Yuan with disdain and dislike, in Tunton's eyes, Zhu Yuan was the closest person to it besides Yao Yao. It was fine for it to bully him, but the fact that this person had suddenly attacked was truly unforgivable. The surrounding prided geniuses hastily retreated when they felt Tunton's ferocity. By the side, Yao Yao's pretty face had turned inconceivably cold for the first time. Her hands were tightly clenched and her gaze eerily frosty as the rune between her brows began to ripple faintly. Don't be rash. Zhu Yuan reached out a bloody hand, grabbing Yao Yao's tiny hand and gripped it tightly. He remembered Master Kang Yuan had said never to allow the seal on Yao Yao's head to loosen. Yao Yao looked towards Zhu Yuan. Her normally clean freak self did not mind Zhu Yuan's bloody hand this time. She blamed herself slightly. She had nearly allowed Wu Huang to kill Zhu Yuan in front of her. Stop! A booming shout descended from the sky at this moment. The Sacred Palace envoy had turned his gaze down, the pressure of a divine dwelling expert sweeping down, suppressing Tunton such that it was unable to move. The Sacred Palace envoy growled, the Saint Remains domain is about to open, don't cause any trouble. Luluo angrily said, then why didn't you stop Wu Huang earlier? The corners of Zhuqiu Qingyu's also curled downwards as she remarked, this envoy doesn't know the meaning of fair. How could they not understand by now that the Sacred Palace envoy had purposely suppressed them earlier, preventing them from aid Zhu Yuan? It was obvious that the envoy of Sacred Palace was protecting Wu Huang. The surrounding geniuses also broke out into whispers. The actions of the Sacred Palace envoy was indeed rather unfair. In the sky above, the envoy's expression turned somewhat ugly. He swept a cold glance at Zhu Yuan and the rest and declared, since you have complaints, don't enter the Saint Remains domain. Luluo's and Zhuqiu Qingyu's faces turned somewhat ugly. What a disgraceful envoy. However, just as the Sacred Palace envoy's words rang out, a figure within a similarly dazzling ball of light in the far-off sky seemed to turn his gaze and looked in their direction, as a mocking voice subsequently followed. He, Zhao Pan, you're representing the Sacred Palace after all, so can you not look so ugly? As the mocking voice rang out in the sky, countless gazes were drawn over. The one who had spoken was also one of the envoys from the 6 sacred sects. Under the attention of those countless gazes, the glaring rays from the ball of light began to weaken, revealing the figure within. One would see a rather messy-looking middle-aged man seated there with a pipe hanging from his mouth. Boundless Genesis chi violently swirled around him like a storm, seemingly causing the world around him to tremble. Zhu Yuan was stunned by the sight of this figure. It was the same person who had asked him for wine yesterday. He would never have imagined that the sloppy-looking uncle would turn out to be one of the envoys from the 6 sacred sects. Above the stone platform where Zhu Yuan and the rest were located, a dark look was revealed on the fair clean-shaven face of Sacred Palace envoy called Zhao Pan. He shot a glance at the slovenly middle-aged man and said, "Oh. What teachings do you have, Mu Wuji?" The scruffy-looking middle-aged man puffed out a breath of green smoke, smiling faintly as he replied, "I've no interest in teaching. I only want to tell you that you don't have the right to banish anyone here, because amongst them may be the future seedlings of the other 5 sects. Zhao Pan's expression darkened. Just as he was about to retort, the other 4 envoys spoke up to mediate. Both of you should hold back a sentence or two. All 6 of us are required to break through this mist, and it will be almost impossible if anyone is missing. In the end, Zhao Pan coldly snorted. His gaze icily swept across Zhu Yuan and the rest, before glancing at Wu Huang with a trace of dissatisfaction, evidently displeased that the latter had not killed Zhu Yuan in a single punch, causing trouble for him. Wu Huang paid no heed to this dissatisfaction. He merely looked towards Zhu Yuan as his eyes narrowed slightly. The fact that the latter had blocked his punch had likewise surprised him. Zhu Yuan lightly swung his bloody arms. The intense pain that emanated from them was testament to the power of Wu Hong's earlier punch. If Zhu Yuan did not have his defensive grade 3 Genesis rune, he would have likely ended up seriously injured or dead. It seems that the other party was beginning to feel a little threatened now that his spirit had reached the advanced illusory stage, and planned to finish him off in the quickest way possible. However, from a certain point of view, wasn't this a good thing? Zhu Yuan's face was akin to a serene rippleless lake as he stared at Wu Huang, but the killing intent in the former's eyes had reached its peak. With a sudden laugh, Zhu Yuan slowly lowered his eyelids. From what he could see, Wu Huang was not as indifferent towards Zhu Yuan as he looked. The actions of the former were clearly saying that he, Wu Huang, was afraid. He was afraid that he would lose everything he possessed. He was afraid that Zhu Yuan was really able to take everything back. Zhu Yuan gently patted Tuntun's head, causing the latter's gigantic body to slowly begin to shrink. However, malicious intent still filled its eyes as they tightly locked onto Wu Huang. By the side, Yao Yao was silent for a while before she said, "I will teach him a lesson if I meet him in the Saint Remains domain, but don't worry, I will not kill him." Zhu Yuan was stunned for a moment, before shooting a glance at Yao Yao. It seemed that Wu Huang's actions had truly angered her this time. Zhu Yuan scratched the back of his head, and could only say, "Try to take it easy." By the side, Zhuo Qiuqingyu's little hands were holding her red cheeks, as she dreamily gazed at Yao Yao. The latter was so domineering at this moment. After all, there were not many who had the qualifications to speak such words in the face of Wu Huang. As the hostile atmosphere began to recede, the watching Xiao Tianxian, Ji Yuling and the rest shook their heads in disappointment. No one had expected that Zhu Yuan would actually be able to withstand Wu Huang's powerful punch. "This kid does have a little ability," remarked Xiao Tianxian in a nonchalant manner. The corners of Ji Yuling's ruddy little mouth turned downwards. "He's just lucky. Given his capabilities, only death awaits him if he encounters Wu Huang for real." The others nodded in agreement and chorused, "If he's unfortunate enough to bump into us in the Saint Remains domain, we'll be sure to teach him a proper lesson, and give Ji Yuling some justice." As they spoke, the 6 envoys in the sky concentrated on the mist above the holy river, and suddenly acted at the same time. Rumble. 6 raging rivers of Genesis Chi that spanned several hundred feet abruptly burst out from the top of their heads. Like giant pillars, the Genesis Chi barbarically shot into the seemingly endless mist. The Genesis Chi pillars began to sweep and vibrate, tearing apart the mist one layer at a time. However, there was a terrifying power within the mist. Ancient runes appeared and began blasting the 6 Genesis Chi pillars, shaving away layer after layer of Genesis Chi. In the sky, the faces of the 6 envoys were grim, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent as they poured all of their attention into their Genesis Chi. Astonishing auras erupted from their bodies, causing even the color of the world around them to change slightly. The prided geniuses below were silenced due to fear. Such power was still far beyond their reach. "Is this the power of the divine dwelling stage?" mumbled Zhu Yuan under his breath. After the Alpha Origin stage was the divine dwelling stage. Once one reaches this level, the chi dwelling in one's body will undergo a transformation. It was said that the Genesis Chi of those that have successfully transformed their chi dwellings into divine dwellings would also evolve, becoming far more powerful than ordinary Genesis Chi. Under the watching eyes of the countless geniuses, 6 glowing pillars of Genesis Chi continued to stir within the mist. The 6 envoys gave their all, and everyone soon began to see a faint cavity appear within the thick, almost vicious mist. As one peered past the thin mist, one seemed to be able to see the ancient land of the Saint Remains domain. "Everyone, enter now." While the crowd was focused on the gap within the mist, the shouts of the 6 envoys rang out like thunder. Rumble. The moment these words were said, it was as if the entire world began to heave. Countless prided geniuses immediately shot forward, transforming to glowing figures, as they charged into the cavity within the mist. Zhu Yuan looked towards the rest and said, "We should get a move on too. No one knows what will happen in the Saint Remains domain, so be careful." Yao Yao, Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu nodded. In the next moment, they shot forward together. The group reached the hole within the mist in the short span of a dozen breaths. No one dared to tarry, pushing their Genesis Chi to the limits as their speed soared. "We're about to enter." Zhu Yuan watched the faint white mist surge towards him as he took in a deep breath, the Genesis Chi around him rippling as it protected his body. Boom. Their bodies finally hit the mist. Space began to distort as if they were crashing into another world, making it impossible to steady one's body, and have no choice but to be randomly tossed around. Zhu Yuan was thrown around till he saw stars. A long time seemed to pass, before he finally felt the space around him solidify as his body was powerfully flung outwards. Crash! Zhu Yuan crashed into the ground, eating a mouthful of soil. He ignored the pain, performing a tumble before getting up. What met his eyes was an ancient world, as if he had been transported back to a prehistoric era. Is this the Saint Remains domain? Zhu Yuan mumbled to himself, as he gazed upon the ancient land before him. This video will end here.